Georgia's primary election is less than a week away. The state's governor, attorney general, and secretary of state are all up for re-election. A new Fox News poll shows Governor Brian Kemp leading Senator David Perdue, former Senator Perdue, by 32 points. Former President Trump has thrown his support behind Perdue, while former Vice President Mike Pence, he's backing Governor Kemp. For more on Georgia's primary election, let's bring in Tia Mitchell. She is a Washington correspondent for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Tia, wonderful to have you here. In March, as you recall, 39% of Republican primary voters supported former Senator Perdue, but his support has dropped. Why has that happened down there in Georgia?
Well, I think that Republican voters are believing that Governor Kemp has made a case for why he deserves a second term in office. Governor Kemp has worked really hard to, drive home issues that resonate with conservative voters on things like gun rights and abortion, and also, of course, economic development issues and recovery from the pandemic. He, of course, has not been able to avoid former President Trump because the former president continues to attack him. But Governor Kemp has had, a response to President Trump that I think, also has allowed him not to alienate even the most conservative Republican voters. And they're really coalescing around him as their nominee for governor in Georgia.
Former Vice President Mike Pence is supporting Governor Kemp. Is that significant in that he's opposing Trump's candidate in the race? And what does it mean to have Pence on the side of the incumbent?
Yeah, I think it's significant that so many establishment Republicans and people who don't normally like to openly, defy, disagree, split with President Trump are doing so in this race. Again, I think it shows two things. Again, I do think it shows that people really do believe in Governor Kemp and believe that he deserves a second term. But I also think this is kind of a way for Republicans to show that we can have a candidate win and be successful without Donald Trump's support. And that's important to Republicans who want to move on from Donald Trump, who do not want him to continue being the leader of the party. They want to move on from the big lie, but they need some successes under their belt to convince, the party establishment that they can still be successful, even if Donald Trump isn't there to boost candidates. So I think in Governor Kemp, they feel good about him. They feel good about his chances in the general election. And I think they believe that if Perdue is on the ticket, not only would it be harder for him to beat Stacey Abrams, but that he could bring other Republicans down. And that's something they're very concerned with in Georgia. Republicans need some wins.
What about the Secretary of State race? You have former President Trump pushing to replace Brad Raffensperger with Congressman Jody Hice. And as we all recall, in that infamous phone call following the 2020 election, then President Trump asked Raffensperger to find votes to overturn the election result in Georgia. And meanwhile, Congressman Hice has fully backed Trump's false claims of election fraud. How is the Hice-Raffensperger race unfolding in the final days?
So this is a race that's a little bit harder to predict. There isn't as much polling. We at the AJC have done some polling that shows it's pretty close, but a lot of undecided voters, as we go further down the ticket, voters just aren't as familiar with the candidates. Jody Hice has that Trump nomination, but he was a representative in a relatively rural district in Georgia, so he doesn't have statewide name ID. Brad Raffensperger does, but again, many Republicans were disappointed that he did not support overturning the election for Donald Trump. So, Jody Hice, I think the Trump endorsement has benefited Jody Hice in ways that David Perdue has not been able to take advantage of. It just hasn't worked as well for him, but it's still looking like that's going to be a close race. And again, as you mentioned, Raffensperger is going for another term, and he resisted Trump's efforts to overturn the election. But he has, he still supported that new election law that was a result of some of those false claims made by Republicans. He is not he's not some liberal. He's still very conservative. It's just he didn't go as far as Donald Trump wanted him to.
How significant is the Secretary of State race for the future of elections in Georgia and in the United States?
It's very crucial. In Georgia, the Secretary of State is in charge of elections, and the Secretary of State has a lot of broad power when it comes to elections. Now, some of that was clawed away after, the efforts to overturn the 2020 election, but the Secretary of State remains a powerful position. We saw just recently it was up to the Secretary of State to decide, should Marjorie Taylor Greene stay on the ballot after a group of voters in her district challenged her eligibility. So that rested with Raffensperger, and he decided she should stay on the ballot. So there's a lot of power there, and there's a lot of concern that should Jody Hice win the nomination, you could have someone as Secretary of State after the general election, that could be in place to help Donald Trump overturn an election if he ran in 2024. There's a Democratic primary for that race too, but it is an essential role in how elections are carried out in Georgia.
Tia, one final question. As a reporter, when you look at Georgia politically, in 2021, it elects 2 Democrats to the U.S. Senate in that early period. Now Senator Raphael Warnock, Senator John Ossoff. Is Georgia moving to become a blue state, or is it a temporarily blue state, purple state that's really a red state at its core? How do you see it?
I think that Georgia demographically was moving to, purple. I wouldn't say blue, but was moving purple. I do think Republicans have done all they can to claw back some of that energy by changing laws in ways that could benefit Republicans. That's why this midterm election is such a big test. It's a test of whether Democrats can build upon their coalition and show that it wasn't just a fluke what happened in 2020 in January 2021. But again, we know Republicans nationwide are looking to Georgia for some wins because they want to send a message that what happened, what Democrats were able to do, they don't want it to be replicated. So there are a lot of tests here for both parties. Candidates matter, but the rules in place matter as well. And we'll see how it shakes out because it's really going to come down to turnout and can each side, who can engage voters, energize voters to come out to the polls in what could be some really close contests come November.
Tia Mitchell, thank you.
Thanks for having me.